Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Ceresys, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project podcast episode, I welcome Toni Careccio of Edison Partners, a 33-year-old growth equity firm based out of Princeton, New Jersey, that invests in growth stage enterprise solutions, FinTech, and healthcare IT components. And Toni's focus is on logistics industry investments. Toni comes from a long line of family members who have worked in the logistics industry, and so you could say literally it is in her blood. On the episode, Toni will share her unique perspective from the outside looking in as she looks out for logistics industry investments. But she also brings something else to that eagle eye. She actually has worked on a logistics technology solution herself, having helped founded a company in the ELD or electronic logging device space. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast. Well, hello, Toni, and welcome to the Freight Project Podcast. As with any first-time guest, we want to make sure our listeners know who you are and a little bit about your background and how you got started working in the world of supply chain and logistics.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me, Adam. Just by way of introduction, I currently work at Edison Partners, which is a 33-year-old growth equity firm based out of Princeton, New Jersey, that invests in growth stage enterprise solutions, FinTech, and healthcare IT companies. We're currently investing out of our ninth fund. It's a $365 million fund. Usually take minority ownership and like to invest when companies have product market fit and now looking for capital to scale their marketing and sales efforts. So we're typically finding those companies in the 5 to 25 million annual run rate range, and we'll write anywhere between $4 to $30 million checks. Within the firm, I have an investment thesis, as you know, around supply chain technology with a larger concentration on logistics, specifically because of my experience and truthfully just my interest and passion for the sector. So just to expand a little bit on my background a bit further, I grew up with a family in the trucking and warehousing industry. About 70 years ago, my grandfather founded our asset-based trucking company called Mecca and Son Trucking that my mother actually still operates until this day. We're based out of Jersey City, New Jersey, have about 100 trucks and primarily focus on drayage servicing Port Newark, and also operate several warehouses throughout the New Jersey area as well. My stepdad also owns a 35-plus-year-old drayage carrier in Port Newark called Best Transportation. And funny enough, both my mother and stepdad are on the executive committee for the Bi-State Motor Carriers Association, which is the largest association that services Port Newark, and all of its members include the stakeholders involved from the steamship lines to the shippers, terminals, drayage carriers, etc. So I grew up in the
power
industry.
Couple, right? Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's very cute.
Oh, that is cute. That's awesome. Yeah.
So after I graduated college, actually at the University of Arizona, I worked on Wall Street for about 4 years on an equity trading desk and was a vice president there. And I ended up leaving my job I got the entrepreneurial bug, but also, I wanted to work full time on building this enterprise solution for trucking companies that I actually had been working on with my cousin and my business partner for several years prior. So the name of the company is called Axle, and it went from being one of the first tech-enabled freight brokerages in 2012. We pivoted to an ELD provider to now it's more so a TMS for drayage carriers with the ELD and marketplace really just as one component. And, we made, like many startups, we made those pivots, as a company for several reasons that, we can dive into in regards to, the inefficiencies surrounding the marketplace model and everything like that. But after working on Axle for several years, I decided to actually join the VC community as a way to expand my knowledge of what it takes to build a company, sitting on the other side of the table from the lens of an investor. which has been really fascinating because now, I've had the operating experience, and now I'm learning about the key traits and characteristics that it takes companies to scale. I'm understanding the unit economics that are really important to understand and track and things like that. And, being able to take my experience from both an investor and former operator to invest in companies that are providing real value to the supply chain is really exciting because I'm able to do it really just on a much greater scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like it's in your blood and it's still around you. Not even, it doesn't stop at work. And when you go to visit family, I'm sure you're talking about some of that stuff still, but you see it from the money side, the family side. And you also had that startup and you learned how to pivot to respond to the market. And it made perfect sense for you all to become an ELD provider given that time around the ELD mandate. And then you had that TMS for drayage, especially as ports have their own interesting challenges as of late with different market forces. And that's probably a big reason why you were asked, just as I was, to speak on a panel at the Journal of Commerce's LogTech in September of 2019. And that conference was really focused on the increased use of supply chain technology and freight, including solutions around TMS freight forwarding, international freight moves, compliance, and a heck of a lot more. But I really liked how they kind of brought it back down to reality, not just this ethereal, large conversation around technology. It was more about let's talk with real stuff, with real people who deal with it every day. And your panel specifically, they talked about that kind of spirit there, where how technology is moving freight interchanges between international and domestic modes, and especially with your drayage experience. I found it quite interesting, because here at Ceresys, we're really focused on domestic moves with our TMS platform for surface modes. Once it gets away from the port and it's on the trucks and on the road, that's us. But you guys had some great conversations on how shippers are using platforms or using digital freight forwarding platforms to really solve their problems. And we can't really forget here at Ceresys that some of our listeners and our customers, even who are hearing this today, might have needs outside what we provide in that domestic freight side. So in reality, they also have to then seek out other solutions. There's a ton of technology that they have to evaluate. They have to sift through in order to get to the right solutions that not only work with each other, but actually does solve their problems. So from that VC perspective where, you're also understanding this because you've been there as a founder and you've seen it your whole life because of your family, how do you look at technology platforms and what they can do as a consideration to invest in or even acquire?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, one thing that we learned from the LogTech conference after Eric Johnson shared the results of a large group of shippers that he surveyed was that I think it was 65% of respondents do not think they manage too many systems, which I actually found interesting. And, they're using transportation management system, a PO system, freight visibility platform. And, you have this thought that companies, shippers, companies as a whole, no matter what the sector is, really want to operate out of one platform, which is why I found that so fascinating. And, I think the results of that survey show that these companies are more interested in actually using a system that does a really good job at what it's intended to do, as opposed to trying to find this all-in-one solution. And so that said, and just to kind of answer your question a little bit more directly, the companies that I'm looking to invest in are going to be market leaders in one particular vertical with many integrations in other market leading platforms, because, the reality of it is, and really anyone that's in this business knows, the supply chain and logistics aspect or operations or element, I should say, to their operation alone is so complex. I mean, just think about the time and effort it takes to moving one single load, right? Mm-hmm. And since there are so many moving parts, it's really almost impossible, at least at this current stage of the market, to really have a single solution to meet all the needs.
Well, and I think that's probably why they maybe don't need all the glaring headlines of the latest advanced technology as a distraction, right? I think we can all have this symptom, myself included, as a manager of a department here at marketing at Ceresys. I can easily get a phone call or read a lot of publications where I start hearing about marketing automation or artificial intelligence that's now going to write all of my content for me. And, that might seem great, and it might be something that I think really honestly just solves my problems with a Band-Aid. And I'm not digging deeper and asking my peers what they're hearing, or even going to these people who have invested in, have kind of really evaluated a lot of these platforms. And, maybe it's the industry's fault. We hype it up and we want to talk about it, And I think it's key, though, and incumbent upon folks like Ceresys, yourself, and even the media and the publications to bring it back to reality, and it's probably why it's probably those headlines and people speaking about technology. It's probably why we've seen more investment than ever before in this space. And just a decade ago, barely any advanced technologies in this industry were being used. And I always wondered why the supply chain had not been disrupted. It seemed like a natural place with all of the moving parts like we saw in marketing or finance. So why do you think it's taken so long to disrupt this industry with technologies versus maybe some other industries?
Well, I think that it's taken the industry so long because similar to, we saw this in the healthcare industry, right? There's never been so much awareness around how much technology can improve inefficiencies in operations. And ultimately, what everyone is trying to do is cut costs, right? So there's been, like you said, a lack of innovation until really 5 to 7 years ago. And as these innovations continue to mature and are being adopted by more and more people and more companies, a significant amount of capital is being invested in the space. And now even more, innovative startups are coming in to further improve the industry. And, on top of that, just look at trucking software alone, right? The average age for a truck driver is around 55 years old. So these individuals have been comfortable with the way they've been operating for many years. And so, that being said, I think that this is really only the beginning of tech disruption in this space, since there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, which is a really big reason why I'm so excited about it. And kind of mentioning to your point before about kind of forming relationships with folks like myself, I really think that shippers should be forming relationships with VCs because whether it's myself or other VCs that are interested in this space, because there's been so much innovation, again, in the last 5 to 7 years, shippers have probably been bombarded with calls and emails from entrepreneurs trying to get their solution in the door. And of course, I respect that because I like those entrepreneurs. I've been there, right, with my last company, but it does make it difficult for shippers to really evaluate what companies are going to provide real value, not only from a technology standpoint, but more importantly, which companies have the resources to support the product and the customer. And for these shippers, it takes a lot of time to implement something new. And the shipper can't really risk this time if it's not a viable solution to their operations. So, if shippers were to go and form relationships with VCs, on the other hand, they can get an understanding of how much these startups have raised, which obviously reflects their resources for how much they can actually support the customer. They can get an understanding from speaking to individuals like myself. Who are the competitors in this space? What's the competitive landscape like? Who's leading in this space? Who we think are leading the space and why?
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard if, especially if you're a shipper. And it's interesting. I look at like marketing analytics, and this is always a fun exercise. And I look back at 2017 and 2018, where the freight market was definitely more in the carrier's favor. There was a capacity crunch going on. The economy was really gangbusters, and shippers were really seeking out solutions. And you could see that from an even search perspective on Google, where the terms around solutions were much higher in those days than they are right now. And I have to have a sense that I think the explosion in the last 12 to 18 months of VC and logistics technology, because, I mean, you kind of said it here, where shippers kind of feel like they're being called on quite a bit from sales folks. They have about 10 technology providers or 3PLs or freight brokers calling them daily. And those shippers are not seeking out those solutions as proactively as they were in years past. I wonder if they're getting kind of this thing where it's like, look, I'm just trying to do my job and I don't really have time for this. And it's hard for me to make this change with so much going on. And that's interesting. Maybe we're almost confusing shippers in a way. So it's good that that's really good advice. And I think once you take a step back from maybe practitioners or even the technology providers and get to the folks who kind of understand the economics of it, like you guys, and get them to vet out who may be the viable company or who have the resources to pull off that solution and aren't just a gimmick. And, there's nothing wrong with gimmicks. That's a bit of marketing. It's a great way to get your startup known. But, like Ceresys, as an example, we've been around for 20 years and we were super innovative by having a web-based TMS all the way back in 1998. That was kind of mind-blowing during the dot-com era. But we're still innovating today and there's still room for innovation in this space. But how do we, beyond just forming relationships with VCs or folks who know the economics, when you do talk to shippers, what are some of the things you're hearing from them today on really what they want from a technology or even a solutions provider?
I think, like I mentioned before, the customer support is extremely important, right? Because at the end of the day, and I think I may have mentioned this on the panel, technology is a great thing, but, it's still a very much relationship-driven industry. Shippers need to feel like they can trust their service provider, so customer support is extremely important. I think that, again, going back to my point earlier on these solutions not really being an all-in-one type fit, they need to really excel. These companies really need to excel in one particular vertical. And with that comes the need for integrations into other systems. So I think, again, like just to reiterate here, customer support is really important. Integrations are really important so that we can work towards getting to a consolidated system for shippers to use as opposed to using several different systems. And then the third is really just being able to kind of unify that data and provide end-to-end visibility. So communication, visibility, data, I think those are the three key things that shippers are really looking for.
That sounds like real advice. That's very much appreciated. And we can't forget the role of people behind all of this technology. All right. It's easy to get caught up in the platforms and the technology, but almost everything you're saying is talk to the people, ask them questions, vet out their resources and their customer support. That's great. You have technology, but does it speak to my other technology? And do I have someone who can help me sift through all this data? Because data is one thing and it's easy to get data, but are you getting the right data? Are you collecting at the right points? And are you able to assemble that in order to analyze it? So that's very good advice. I love that. And so before I let you go today, tell me, since you're kind of really talking about some pretty cool companies, you're in there speaking real game, which I like. I want to get your perspective on the outlook for the use of logistics technology. Will we see massive consolidation since there's a great proliferation of providers now where bigger companies are going to gobble up smaller tech platforms? Sort of like what we saw when, Facebook acquired Instagram and WhatsApp. And what would that mean for supply chain professionals around the globe?
Yeah, so, we have been, right? And certainly we'll continue to see massive consolidation in the industry. If you look at 2018, there were 109 supply chain management deals accounting for about a little over, I think, 26 billion. And in the first half of 2019 alone, we saw 109 deals valued at almost 8 billion. And transportation related software represented, I think, 35% of all supply chain management M&A activity. And so for me, I mean, I think this is an extremely positive thing for supply chain professionals because it means companies are acquiring to ultimately integrate features or solutions that their current system doesn't offer or is maybe offered on a limited scale. And despite the results that we saw from that survey that I mentioned earlier with shippers not minding the use of several systems, the more and more we can consolidate these systems, the easier it will be for them. And the more I think they will mind in the future using several systems. And, you know, just as one example, you think of the tech-enabled freight brokerages like Uber Freight, for example, right? Mm-hmm. They probably have tens of thousands of carriers onboarded into their network. And just like any other freight broker, a digital or traditional freight broker, their retention, and the way I'm classifying that is really how many times a driver has moved more than one load for them, is probably around 5%, right? And that's because a driver has to log into Uber's app and Convoy's app and Cargomatic's app and, you know, they're logging into these systems separately from their ELD software and separately from however they're being dispatched, you know, loads by their company, by their dispatchers. And now I bet if a driver could log into the same Uber app where he or she is not only able to book loads through Uber, but also able to manage their hours of service and receive dispatch loads from their dispatcher through another broker, I think that would make them very happy. And I think it's, you know, they've been drivers, again, this is just one brief example, but, you know, they've been very hesitant around innovation in the space. And I think the more we can consolidate and make it easier for them, the more they'll be happier with the innovation and willing to adopt technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the user experience, that's the next big focus, you know, making it a single pane of glass. And I think that there are tons of industries that are going to have to face that reckoning. Right now in the restaurant technology space, it's really no different than what we're all trying to do, the delivery of something. In our case, it's freight. For restaurants, it's food, but it's a similar kind of setup. You know, we're also seeing that with things like final mile and different legs of freight journeys, not just, you know, in LTL, but, you know, there's a lot of moving parts. And it's interesting to sit back and talk about all this stuff. But I think the point that you hit on more than anything is when you think about the individual players, the shipper, the truck driver, and then you have solution providers. We can't take those first two for granted, especially as a truck driver. They actually haul our stuff. So we got to think about their experience, but also we got to think about the shipper's experience. And at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon all of us to get, I think, both of those parties truly as middle people in that conversation, the best experience possible so that they can maximize their efficiency, because that's how we're all going to win too. So Toni, really appreciate your perspective. I don't think we've had somebody on kind of really with more of that objective view. I think we're all biased to come on here with our different companies, and that's fine. Although they're all great thought leaders and things like that, I think what you've done objectively is hit on some really key points. So Toni, one more time, where are you from and where can they find a little more about you and maybe reach out to connect as you suggested so that they get to know more VCs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm based in Princeton, New Jersey, working at Edison Partners. You could find my company, our website is edisonpartners.com. And if you click on the team page and go to my profile, my email is right on there. So feel free to reach out and also add me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And on this podcast publishing page, I'll make sure I put links to all that stuff so you guys can find it easily. Also, if you're on Ceresys.com listening to this, thanks again, Toni, and for all of the great Freight Project podcast listeners out there, thanks for tuning in for each episode. We'll see ya on the next one.